Ethan Carter hadn't been to the cemetery in years. Life had a way of pulling people in so many directions that even the most important things could slip through the cracks. Work deadlines loomed over him like storm clouds. Relationships felt strained under the weight of unspoken words, and somewhere along the way, he'd lost touch with the simple joys that used to bring him peace. But today was different. Today wasn't just any day. It was the anniversary of his mother's passing. As Ethan drove toward the old cemetery on the outskirts of town, memories began flooding back without warning. He remembered her smile, the kind that lit up a room, and the way she always seemed to know exactly what he needed even when he didn't say it out loud. She had been his anchor during tough times, the one person who never judged him no matter how badly he messed up. Losing her had left an ache in his chest that never fully went away, though he tried hard to bury it beneath layers of busyness. The car slowed as he approached the iron gates of the cemetery. They creaked open reluctantly, as if protesting his arrival after such a long absence. Ethan parked near the entrance and stepped out, feeling the cool breeze brush against his face. The air smelled faintly of earth and wildflowers, a scent both familiar and comforting. He glanced down at the bouquet of white roses he'd brought, their petals soft and delicate in his hands. It felt strange to think about placing them on her grave after all this time. Walking along the narrow path lined with rows of headstones, Ethan noticed how quiet everything was. There were no other visitors around, only the sound of leaves rustling above him and birds chirping faintly in the distance. The silence pressed against him, heavy yet peaceful. Each step took him closer to the spot where his mother rested, and with every step his heart grew heavier. He wasn't sure why he'd waited so long to come back here. Maybe it was because facing her absence felt too painful, or maybe he'd convinced himself that he didn't have time for grief anymore. Finally, he reached the grave. The headstone stood weathered but still sturdy, its surface worn smooth by years of wind and rain. Her name was engraved clearly across the top, Margaret Carter. Below it were the dates of her birth and death, followed by a short inscription that read, "Beloved Mother." Ethan knelt down slowly, brushing away bits of dirt and dried leaves that had gathered around the base of the stone. His fingers traced the letters of her name, each curve and line stirring emotions he'd kept locked away for far too long. For a moment he simply sat there, staring at the ground. Memories came rushing back like waves crashing against the shore. He thought about the countless mornings she'd woken him up with breakfast ready on the table, humming softly to herself as sunlight streamed through the kitchen window. He remembered lazy afternoons spent playing board games together, her laughter filling the room whenever he teased her about losing. And then there were the harder moments, the nights when life threw challenges their way, and she held him close, whispering reassurances that everything would be okay. Tears welled up in his eyes, but he blinked them away quickly. Crying wouldn't change anything. It wouldn't bring her back. Instead, he focused on arranging the white roses neatly atop the grave. As he did, he whispered softly, "I miss you, Mom. I'm sorry I haven't been here sooner." The words hung in the air for a few seconds before fading into the silence. Ethan sighed deeply, letting the weight of his guilt settle over him. He knew he couldn't undo the years he'd ignored this place, but at least now he was here. At least now. He was trying. He leaned back slightly, sitting cross-legged on the grass, and closed his eyes. For the first time in ages, he allowed himself to sit quietly, listening to the sounds of nature around him. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the faint scent of pine. Somewhere nearby, a bird sang a cheerful tune, its melody light and carefree. It almost felt like his mother was there with him, watching over him as she always had. But then, something unexpected happened. Just as Ethan opened his eyes and prepared to stand up, a voice cut through the stillness. It was soft, hesitant, almost as if unsure whether it should speak at all. Yet it was unmistakable. "Ethan?" His breath caught in his throat. He froze, his body going rigid with shock. That voice, it couldn't be. Could it? Slowly he turned, his head scanning the empty rows of gravestones behind him. No one was there. The cemetery remained deserted, just as it had been moments earlier. His pulse quickened as he glanced around nervously, half expecting someone to jump out from behind, a tree or a bench. But there was no one. Convinced he must be imagining things, Ethan shook his head and muttered under his breath, "I'm losing my mind." But then it came again, louder this time, clearer than before. "Ethan, please listen to me." This time, there was no denying it. The voice was real, or at least it felt real. It wasn't coming from behind him, nor from any specific direction. It seemed to float in the air surrounding him, enveloping him in a cocoon of familiarity. His heart raced as recognition dawned. It was her. It was his mother's voice. Ethan's hands trembled as he gripped the edge of his jeans tightly. His mind screamed at him to run, to get out of there as fast as possible. This wasn't normal. People didn't hear voices from beyond the grave, but another part of him, a deeper, quieter part, urged him to stay. If this really was her, if somehow she had found a way to reach him, then he owed it to her to listen. Taking a shaky breath, Ethan whispered, "Mom, is that you?" There was a pause, brief but charged with anticipation. Then softly, the voice replied, "Yes, sweetheart, it's me." Ethan's world tilted on its axis. None of this made sense, and yet it felt more real than anything he'd experienced in years. Whatever doubts or fears he might have had melted away in that instant, replaced by an overwhelming desire to understand. What did she want? Why was she speaking to him now after all this time? "I don't know how this is happening," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm here. I'm listening." The response came quickly, filled with warmth and love. "I've missed you, Ethan, more than you'll ever know." Ethan's mind raced as he tried to process what was happening. The voice, his mother's voice, was undeniably real, yet it defied everything he knew about the world. He sat there, frozen in place, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure it could be heard across the empty cemetery. His hands clenched tightly around the fabric of his jeans, seeking some semblance of control amidst the chaos swirling inside him. "Mom?" he whispered again, his voice trembling. "Is this really you?" The response came immediately, soft but steady, wrapping around him like a warm embrace. "Yes, sweetheart. It's really me." Ethan wanted to believe her, but doubt clawed at the edges of his mind. Was he dreaming? Had grief finally caught up with him, manifesting itself in ways he couldn't explain? Or worse, was he losing his grip on reality? He glanced around nervously, half expecting someone to appear and tell him this was all some elaborate prank. But the cemetery remained eerily silent, save for the rustling leaves overhead and the distant chirping of birds. "I don't understand," he said, his voice cracking under the weight of emotion. How is this possible?" There was a pause, as if she were choosing her words carefully. When she spoke again, her tone carried a mixture of sadness and reassurance. "I know this is hard for you to comprehend, Ethan. Believe me, I never imagined I'd find a way to reach out like this either. But something important needs to be said, and I couldn't let another day pass without telling you." Her words sent a shiver down his spine. Something important? What could possibly be so urgent that it warranted communication from beyond the grave? 1,000 questions flooded his mind, each one vying for attention. But before he could ask anything, she continued, "Ethan, I need you to go home. To the house where you grew up. There's something there. A wooden box hidden away in the attic. You'll know it when you see it. It has answers you've been searching for even if you didn't realize it." Ethan blinked, trying to make sense of her cryptic instructions. A wooden box? Answers to what? He opened his mouth to press her for more details, but she cut him off gently. "I can't explain everything right now," she said, her voice tinged with regret. "But trust me, sweetheart, this is important. More important than you can imagine." The urgency in her tone made his stomach churn. Whatever she was referring to, it clearly wasn't trivial. Still, skepticism lingered in the back of his mind. Wooden boxes and hidden attics sounded like something out of a mystery novel, not real life. Yet deep down, he felt an inexplicable pull, a strange mix of curiosity and longing that urged him to follow her instructions. "Okay," he said slowly, his voice barely audible. "I'll go." "But Mom, why now? Why after all these years?" Her sigh was faint, almost imperceptible, but it carried a lifetime of unspoken emotions. "Because you're ready, Ethan. You've spent so long running from the past, burying your pain instead of facing it. I've watched over you, hoping you'd find peace on your own. But sometimes people need a little nudge to move forward." Her words struck a chord within him, stirring memories of the countless nights he'd lain awake, staring at the ceiling, haunted by feelings he couldn't name. Grief, guilt, regret. They had all woven themselves into the fabric of his life, shaping him in ways he hadn't fully understood until now. Maybe she was right. Maybe he had been running, using work and distractions to avoid confronting the truth. "I'll do it," he promised, his resolve strengthening with each passing second. "I'll find the box. But Mom, will I hear from you again? Will you guide me?" Her laughter floated through the air, light and melodic just as he remembered it from his childhood. "Always, my love. I'm never far away. Just trust yourself, and you'll find the answers you need." With those final words, her presence seemed to fade, leaving behind only the gentle rustle of leaves and the faint scent of wildflowers. Ethan sat there for a long time, staring at the gravestone in front of him, replaying their conversation over and over in his mind. It felt surreal, like stepping out of a dream and into reality. But which part was the dream, and which was real? Eventually, he stood up, brushing dirt and grass off his pants. The bouquet of white roses lay neatly arranged on the grave, their petals glowing softly in the afternoon sunlight. He took one last look at the headstone, committing every detail to memory before turning away. As he walked back toward his car, his thoughts were consumed by the task ahead, finding the mysterious wooden box. The drive home was a blur. Ethan's mind buzzed with questions, theories, and fragments of memories. He tried to recall any mention of a wooden box during his childhood, but nothing came to mind. The attic of his old house had always been off-limits when he was growing up. A dusty, forgotten space filled with cobwebs and relics of the past. His parents rarely spoke about what was stored up there, dismissing it as just old junk. Could the box have been hiding among those forgotten items all along? When he arrived at the house, nostalgia hit him like a wave. The small suburban home looked exactly as he remembered it, though time had weathered its paint and dulled its shine. The garden was overgrown, and the mailbox leaned slightly to one side, but the sight of it still stirred something deep within him. Unlocking the front door felt like stepping into a time capsule. The familiar creak of the floorboards beneath his feet transported him back to simpler days. He made his way upstairs, pausing briefly outside his old bedroom. The door was closed, just as he'd left it years ago. Part of him wanted to peek inside, to revisit the room where he'd spent countless hours dreaming and daydreaming, but he resisted the urge, knowing that the attic was his priority. The ladder leading to the attic was tucked away in a corner of the hallway, hidden behind a small hatch. Ethan pulled it down, wincing at the loud squeak of the hinges. Climbing up cautiously, he emerged into a dimly lit space filled with shadows and dust motes dancing in the slanted sunlight streaming through the tiny window. The air smelled musty, carrying hints of aged wood and forgotten treasures. Boxes of varying sizes were stacked haphazardly against the walls, their labels faded and illegible. Old furniture draped in white sheets loomed like ghosts in the corners. Ethan began sifting through the clutter, opening boxes and examining their contents. Most held nothing of interest. Old photo albums, Christmas decorations, stacks of yellowed newspapers. But then, tucked away in a far corner, he spotted it. The wooden box was smaller than he'd expected, no bigger than a shoebox, but its intricate carvings set it apart from the other items. Delicate patterns of vines and flowers adorned its surface, worn smooth by years of handling. Ethan picked it up carefully, feeling its weight in his hands. There was no lock, only a simple latch that clicked open easily. Inside, he found a bundle of letters tied together with a faded ribbon. The paper was brittle with age, the ink smudged in places, but the handwriting was unmistakable. It belonged to his grandmother. Confusion washed over him as he skimmed the first few lines. These weren't ordinary letters. They contained secrets, revelations that would change everything he thought he knew about his family. Ethan sank onto the floor, clutching the box tightly. His mother's voice echoed in his mind, urging him to keep going, to uncover the truth. Whatever lay ahead, he knew one thing for certain: his journey was far from over. Ethan sat cross-legged on the dusty attic floor, the wooden box resting in his lap like a treasure chest holding secrets too long buried. The faint scent of aged wood and forgotten memories lingered in the air, mingling with the dust motes that floated lazily in the shafts of sunlight streaming through the tiny window. His heart thudded in his chest as he untied the faded ribbon binding the bundle of letters together. Each movement felt deliberate, almost ceremonial, as if he were opening a door to a part of his life he'd never known existed. The first letter was addressed to his mother, Margaret, written in his grandmother's neat cursive handwriting. As Ethan unfolded the fragile paper, he noticed how carefully it had been preserved despite its age. He began reading aloud, his voice soft and hesitant, as though speaking the words might awaken something dormant within him. "Dearest Margaret," the letter began, "I hope this finds you well. There is much I need to say, but I fear putting pen to paper will not make it any easier. You deserve to know the truth about your father, our family's past, and why we've kept it hidden for so long." Ethan paused, his breath catching in his throat. His grandfather? His mother's father? What could possibly be so significant about him that it warranted secrecy? His mind raced with possibilities, each more improbable than the last. Was there some scandal? A betrayal? Or worse, a crime? He continued reading, his eyes scanning the lines quickly now, eager to piece together the fragments of the story. The letter revealed that Ethan's biological grandfather, Daniel Harper, wasn't the man who had raised Margaret. Instead, Daniel was an artist, a kind-hearted dreamer who had fallen deeply in love with Ethan's great-grandmother during a summer spent painting landscapes in the countryside. Their relationship blossomed quietly, away from prying eyes until she became pregnant with Margaret. But their happiness was short-lived. When her family discovered the pregnancy, they were furious. Daniel came from humble beginnings, with no wealth or status to offer. To them, he was unworthy of their daughter. They forbade the couple from seeing each other, forcing her to marry another man, a wealthy businessman named Richard Carter, who promised security and stability. Daniel disappeared shortly after, leaving behind only sketches and broken promises. Ethan's hands trembled as he set the letter down, his mind reeling. This explained so much: the strained relationship between his mother and her adoptive father, the unspoken tension that had always hung over family gatherings. But it also raised countless questions. Why hadn't anyone told him about this before? Had his mother known all along? And what had happened to Daniel Harper? Curiosity burned inside him, driving him to dig deeper. He picked up the next letter, dated several years later. In it, his grandmother wrote about Daniel's reappearance in their lives. Apparently, he hadn't vanished entirely. He'd moved to a nearby town, continuing to paint while struggling to make ends meet. Over time, he and Margaret's mother had secretly rekindled their connection, exchanging letters and meeting in secret when they could. However, their reunion didn't go unnoticed. One day, Richard Carter, the man who had legally adopted Margaret, discovered the truth. Consumed by anger and jealousy, he confronted Daniel, accusing him of trying to disrupt his family. A heated argument ensued, culminating in Daniel being forced out of town under threat of violence. From that point onward, Daniel vanished completely, leaving no trace of where he had gone or whether he was even alive. As Ethan read these words, a wave of sadness washed over him. It was clear that Daniel had loved Margaret's mother deeply, yet circumstances beyond his control had torn them apart. The injustice of it all weighed heavily on Ethan's shoulders. How many lives had been affected by this chain of events? How much pain had been passed down through generations because of decisions made in anger and fear? The final letter was the most revealing and the most heartbreaking. Written just months before his grandmother's death, it contained a plea for forgiveness. She confessed that she had kept the truth about Daniel Harper hidden from Margaret for most of her life, believing it would protect her from the same hardships she herself had endured. Only when Margaret turned 18 did she finally reveal the full story, hoping it would bring closure rather than resentment. But even then, the wounds ran deep. Margaret struggled to reconcile her identity as both Richard Carter's daughter and Daniel Harper's child. She carried the weight of two legacies, neither of which felt entirely hers. Her grief over losing Daniel, not once but twice, shaped her in ways Ethan was only beginning to understand. By the time Ethan finished reading the last letter, tears streamed down his face. He wiped them away impatiently, feeling a mix of emotions he couldn't quite name. Anger at the choices made by those who came before him, sadness for the love that had been lost, and gratitude for his mother, who had endured so much and still managed to pour every ounce of her strength into raising him. He sat there for a long time, letting the weight of the revelations settle over him. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together, but one question remained. Who was Daniel Harper? Where had he gone after disappearing from their lives? And was there any chance of finding out? Ethan knew what he had to do next. If his mother had guided him to this box, then she must have wanted him to uncover the rest of the story. Determination surged within him, pushing aside the doubts and fears that had plagued him earlier. He would find answers, not just for himself, but for her. With the wooden box tucked securely under his arm, Ethan climbed down from the attic and returned to the main part of the house. The late afternoon sun cast golden hues across the living room, illuminating photographs hanging on the walls. For the first time, he looked at them differently. Faces that had once seemed familiar now carried new layers of meaning. His mother's smile, radiant and warm, held traces of both Richard Carter's sternness and Daniel Harper's artistic soul. She was a bridge between two worlds, a testament to resilience and love. Ethan grabbed a notebook and pen from the kitchen drawer, jotting down key details from the letters. Names, dates, locations, they were all clues that might lead him closer to the truth. He decided to start with the town mentioned in the letters, where Daniel had lived after leaving Margaret's mother. Perhaps someone there remembered him. Perhaps there were records or artifacts that could shed light on his disappearance. Before leaving the house, Ethan stood in front of the mirror in the hallway, studying his reflection. He barely recognized the man staring back at him. Gone was the weary, disconnected version of himself who had arrived at the cemetery earlier that day. In his place stood someone determined, driven by purpose. Whatever lay ahead, he knew he couldn't turn back now. As he stepped outside, the cool evening breeze greeted him, carrying with it a sense of possibility. Somewhere out there, answers awaited. And somewhere, he felt certain, his mother was watching over him, guiding him forward. Ethan's journey to uncover the truth about Daniel Harper began with a sense of urgency that bordered on obsession. Armed with the clues from the letters and a growing determination to piece together his family's fractured history, he set out early the next morning. The town mentioned in the letters was small and unassuming, nestled in the countryside about an hour's drive from where he lived. It was the kind of place where time seemed to move slower, where people knew each other by name, and where secrets, no matter how deeply buried, often had a way of surfacing eventually. When Ethan arrived, the quiet charm of the town struck him immediately. Cobblestone streets wound lazily through rows of quaint shops and weathered brick buildings, their facades adorned with flower boxes bursting with vibrant blooms. A sign at the edge of town welcomed visitors with faded paint that read, "Welcome to Willowbrook, where memories live on." The irony wasn't lost on Ethan as he parked his car near the center of town and stepped out into the crisp morning air. His first stop was the local library, a cozy one-story building tucked between a bakery and a hardware store. Inside, the scent of old books mingled with the faint aroma of coffee from a small cafe in the corner. The librarian, a kindly woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled back into a neat bun, greeted him warmly. Her name tag read Marge, and she wore a pair of round glasses perched precariously on the tip of her nose. "I'm looking for information about someone who might have lived here years ago," Ethan explained, leaning against the counter. "His name is Daniel Harper. He was an artist." Marge's expression shifted slightly, her eyes narrowing as if she were sifting through memories. "Daniel Harper," she murmured thoughtfully. "The name sounds familiar, but it's been a long time since anyone's mentioned him around here. Let me check our archives." She disappeared into a back room, leaving Ethan alone with his thoughts. He wandered over to the cafe area, ordering a cup of coffee to calm his nerves. As he sipped the warm liquid, he couldn't help but feel a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Every step he took brought him closer to understanding, not just his mother's past, but his own identity. A few minutes later, Marge returned carrying a dusty ledger bound in cracked leather. "We don't have much," she admitted apologetically, "but this is our oldest record book. It lists residents from decades ago, along with some notes about their occupations and contributions to the community." Ethan flipped through the pages carefully, scanning names until he found what he was looking for. There it was. Daniel Harper, painter. Listed beside his name was an address, a small cottage on the outskirts of town, and a brief note describing him as a talented artist whose work captured the beauty of Willowbrook. Beneath that, however, was a line that made Ethan's heart sink. "Disappeared under mysterious circumstances in 1973. "Do you know anything else about him?" Ethan asked, looking up at Marge. "What happened after he disappeared?" Marge shook her head slowly. "Not many details remain. People talked about it for a while, of course. They always do when something unusual happens. But eventually, life moved on. Some said he left because of trouble with another man, though no one ever confirmed it. Others believed he simply grew tired of staying in one place." Though disappointed, Ethan thanked her and decided to visit the address listed in the ledger. If nothing else, maybe the cottage would hold some clues. Following the directions provided by Marge, he drove along winding country roads lined with towering oak trees and fields dotted with wildflowers. The farther he ventured from the heart of Willowbrook, the more isolated the landscape became. Finally, he reached the cottage. It stood at the end of a narrow dirt path, partially hidden behind overgrown bushes and ivy-covered walls. The structure itself was modest, its wooden siding grayed with age and its roof sagging under the weight of years. Despite its dilapidated state, there was an undeniable charm to the place, as if it held stories waiting to be told. Ethan knocked on the door tentatively, half expecting no response. To his surprise, a voice called out from inside. "Who's there?" "It's Ethan Carter," he replied, stepping back slightly. "I'm here to ask about Daniel Harper." The door creaked open slowly, revealing an elderly woman leaning heavily on a cane. Her face was lined with wrinkles, but her eyes sparkled with intelligence and curiosity. She introduced herself as Edith Grayson, explaining that she had purchased the property shortly after Daniel's disappearance. "I remember him well," she said, inviting Ethan inside. He was a kind soul, always willing to lend a hand or share a smile. His paintings, they were breathtaking. I used to watch him work sometimes, sitting by the window with sunlight streaming in. He had a gift. Edith led him to a small room at the back of the house, which she referred to as Daniel's studio. Though most of his belongings had been cleared out long ago, a few items remained. A battered easel, a stack of empty canvases, and a box filled with sketches and unfinished works. As Ethan sifted through the contents, he discovered a sketchbook tucked beneath the pile. Its pages were filled with intricate drawings of landscapes, portraits, and abstract designs, each one bearing traces of Daniel's unique style. But what caught Ethan's attention most was a letter tucked inside the sketchbook. Written in Daniel's handwriting, it was addressed to Margaret's mother, the same woman he had loved and lost so many years ago. In it, he poured out his heart, expressing regret for leaving and promising that he had never stopped thinking about her or their daughter. Reading those words felt like stepping into a private moment between two people who had shared something, profound yet tragically fleeting. Tears welled up in Ethan's eyes as he realized how much pain both Daniel and his mother must have endured because of circumstances beyond their control. Before leaving, Edith handed him a photograph she had kept all these years. It showed Daniel standing outside the cottage, paintbrush in hand, smiling broadly as sunlight illuminated his face. For the first time, Ethan saw the man who had shaped so much of his family's story, a man whose dreams and struggles now felt deeply personal. On the drive home, Ethan replayed everything he had learned in his mind. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together, painting a clearer picture of Daniel Harper's life and legacy. But questions still lingered. Why had Richard Carter gone to such lengths to erase Daniel from their lives? And what had ultimately become of him? As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in hues of orange and pink, Ethan felt a renewed sense of purpose. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew he was on the right path, not just to uncover the truth, but to honor the love and resilience that had defined his family across generations. Ethan's determination burned brighter with each passing day. The photograph of Daniel Harper and the heartfelt letter tucked inside the sketchbook had only deepened his resolve to uncover the full story. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to discover, more pieces of the puzzle waiting to be found. With the clues he'd gathered so far, he decided to dig even deeper, reaching out to distant relatives and scouring public records for any mention of Daniel Harper. His first call was to an elderly aunt who lived in a neighboring state. She was one of the few remaining family members who might remember something about Daniel or the events surrounding his disappearance. When Ethan explained what he was looking for, her voice softened, tinged with nostalgia. "Daniel. Yes, I remember him," she said slowly. "He wasn't around much when we were growing up, but your grandmother used to talk about him sometimes. She always sounded sad when she mentioned his name." The aunt shared fragments of stories she'd overheard as a child. How Daniel had been forced to leave town after a confrontation with Richard Carter. How Margaret's mother had cried for weeks afterward. And how the family had tried to erase all traces of him from their lives. It was clear that Daniel's presence had left a lasting mark, both positive and painful. Armed with this new information, Ethan turned his attention to official records. He visited the county courthouse, poring over old documents and newspaper archives. At first, it seemed like a dead end. Decades had passed since Daniel's disappearance, and many records were incomplete or lost to time. But then, buried in a dusty file cabinet, he stumbled upon a police report filed in 1973, the same year Daniel vanished. The report was brief, almost dismissive, but it contained crucial details. Witnesses claimed they had seen Daniel arguing with Richard Carter near the edge of Willowbrook late one evening. The argument reportedly grew heated, with voices raised and accusations flying. No physical altercation was reported, but Daniel hadn't been seen in town after that night. Richard, questioned by authorities, insisted he had no idea where Daniel had gone and claimed their disagreement had been minor, a business dispute, nothing more. Ethan's stomach churned as he read the account. While the report didn't provide definitive answers, it painted a clearer picture of the tension between the two men. It also raised unsettling questions. Had Richard played a larger role in Daniel's disappearance than anyone realized? Was the business dispute merely a cover for something deeper, perhaps jealousy or revenge? Determined to learn more, Ethan tracked down another lead, a woman named Clara Bennett, who had known Daniel during his time in Willowbrook. According to Edith Grayson, Clara had been one of Daniel's closest friends and might still live nearby. After some searching, Ethan located her address, a small farmhouse surrounded by rolling hills and fields of golden wheat. When Ethan arrived, Clara greeted him cautiously, her weathered face creased with curiosity. She was in her late 70s, with sharp blue eyes that seemed to see straight through him. Once Ethan explained why he was there, however, her demeanor softened. "Daniel was a good man," she said firmly. settling into a chair on her porch. Too good for this world, really. He didn't deserve what happened to him. Clara recounted memories of Daniel with warmth and affection. She described him as gentle and kind, someone who saw beauty in everything, even in the darkest moments. But she also revealed darker truths. Richard Carter hated Daniel, she admitted bluntly. Not just because of the affair with Margaret's mother, though that was part of it. Richard saw Daniel as a threat, a reminder of everything he wasn't. Daniel was creative, free-spirited, loved without condition. Richard, well, let's just say he wasn't built the same way. She hesitated before continuing, choosing her words carefully. There were rumors back then. Whispers that Richard had done more than argue with Daniel that night. Some people thought he chased him out of town, maybe even threatened him, but no one dared say anything aloud. Richard had money, power, connections. Anyone who crossed him paid the price. Ethan listened intently, his mind racing with possibilities. If Clara's suspicions were true, then Daniel's disappearance might not have been voluntary at all. Could Richard have driven him away? Or worse? The thought sent a chill down Ethan's spine, but he pushed it aside for now. He needed facts, not speculation. "Do you think Daniel is still alive?" Ethan asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Clara shook her head sadly. "I don't know, dear. If he were, I'd like to believe he would have come back for Margaret's mother, or at least reached out somehow. But life has a way of pulling people apart, doesn't it?" Her words lingered in Ethan's mind long after he left her farmhouse. As he drove home, the weight of what he'd learned settled over him like a heavy blanket. His grandfather, Richard Carter, hadn't just erased Daniel from their family's history. He may have actively destroyed any chance of reconciliation. The bitterness and anger that had fueled Richard's actions had rippled through generations, shaping Ethan's own life in ways he was only beginning to understand. That night, Ethan sat alone in his living room, staring at the photograph of Daniel Harper. For the first time, he allowed himself to truly imagine the man behind the image. Daniel had been an artist, a dreamer, a father whose love for his daughter had been stolen by circumstances beyond his control. And yet, despite everything, his legacy endured. In the letters, the sketches, the stories handed down through whispers and tears. Ethan felt a pang of guilt as he thought about his mother. She had carried the burden of knowing the truth while protecting him from its weight. Now he understood why she had kept silent for so long. Love wasn't always easy or straightforward. It came with scars, sacrifices, and secrets. But it also had the power to heal, to connect, to transcend time itself. As he drifted off to sleep, Ethan's thoughts turned inward. He realized that uncovering Daniel's story wasn't just about finding closure for himself. It was about honoring the resilience of those who had come before him. Their struggles, their choices, their unwavering hope for a better future. Somewhere along the way, he had stopped running from the past and started embracing it, piece by fragile piece. And then, just as sleep began to take hold, he heard it again. A soft, familiar voice. "You're doing the right thing, Ethan," it whispered, warm and comforting. "Don't give up." Ethan smiled faintly, reassured by the presence of his mother. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew he wouldn't face them alone. Ethan woke the next morning with a renewed sense of clarity. The voice of his mother, soft and encouraging, had lingered in his mind like a gentle breeze guiding him forward. He knew he was close to uncovering the final pieces of the puzzle, but more importantly, he understood that this journey wasn't just about answers, it was about healing. Healing for himself, for his mother, and for the generations who had carried the weight of secrets too heavy to bear alone. With the photograph of Daniel Harper tucked safely in his pocket, and the letters from the wooden box spread out on the kitchen table, Ethan began piecing together what he had learned so far. Each clue painted part of the picture. Daniel's love for Margaret's mother, Richard Carter's jealousy, the mysterious disappearance, and the ripple effect it had on their family. But there was still one question that loomed large. What had truly happened to Daniel after that fateful night? Determined to find closure, Ethan decided to revisit Willowbrook one last time. This time he brought the photograph with him, hoping someone might recognize Daniel or offer new insights. As he drove through the familiar streets, he noticed how quiet the town felt, a place frozen in time where memories seemed to linger in every corner. It was as if the past refused to let go, whispering its stories to those willing to listen. His first stop was Edith Grayson's cottage. When she opened the door, her face lit up with recognition. "Back so soon?" she asked with a warm smile. "Did you find anything else?" "I'm getting closer," Ethan replied, showing her the photograph. "Do you think anyone around here would remember him? Maybe someone saw him leave town, or knows where he went afterward." Edith studied the image carefully, her brow furrowing in thought. "You know, I think I might know someone who could help. Old Mr. Thompson. He used to run the general store back then. He's retired now, but he has a sharp memory. If anyone remembers seeing Daniel after that night, it'd be him." She gave Ethan directions to Mr. Thompson's house, a modest bungalow at the edge of town. When Ethan arrived, he found an elderly man sitting on the porch, rocking slowly in a creaky chair. His hair was white as snow, and his hands were calloused from years of hard work, but his eyes sparkled with intelligence. "Mr. Thompson?" Ethan called out, approaching cautiously. "I'm looking for information about someone who lived here decades ago, Daniel Harper." The old man's gaze sharpened immediately. "Daniel Harper?" he repeated, leaning forward slightly. "Now, there's a name I haven't heard in years. What do you want to know about him?" Ethan explained his connection to Daniel and shared the details he had uncovered so far. Mr. Thompson listened intently, nodding occasionally, as if piecing together fragments of a long-forgotten story. When Ethan finished, the old man sighed, deeply. "I'll tell you what I know," he said finally. "After that argument with Richard Carter, Daniel came into my store late one evening. He looked different. Troubled, like he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. He bought supplies, food, a map, some basic tools, and said he needed to get away for a while. That was the last time I ever saw him." Ethan's heart sank. "Did he say where he was going?" Mr. Thompson shook his head. "No, but I overheard him talking to someone on the phone later that night. He mentioned heading west, to California, I think. Said he wanted to start fresh, maybe find a place where no one knew his name." The revelation hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. California? Had Daniel really left everything behind to start anew? Or had something or someone prevented him from reaching his destination? Before leaving, Mr. Thompson handed Ethan a small notebook he had kept all those years ago. "This might not mean much to you," he said, "but it's got a record of everyone who came into my store during that time. Maybe you'll find something useful." Grateful for the gesture, Ethan thanked him and returned to his car. Flipping through the notebook, he discovered a scribbled entry dated shortly after Daniel's visit. Daniel Harper, paid cash for supplies, heading west. Below it was a note about a bus ticket purchased for San Francisco. Ethan's mind raced. If Daniel had indeed gone to California, perhaps there was a way to trace his journey further. With renewed determination, he contacted archives and historical societies in San Francisco, searching for any mention of Daniel Harper. Days turned into weeks as he sifted through records, chased leads, and followed dead ends. Just when he was beginning to lose hope, he received an email from a librarian in Oakland containing a scanned newspaper clipping from 1974. The article was brief, tucked away in the classified section. It read, "Local artist opens gallery exhibit, works inspired by nature and memory." Beneath the headline was a black and white photo of a man standing beside a painting. Though the image was grainy, Ethan recognized the face instantly. It was Daniel Harper. Tears welled up in Ethan's eyes as he stared at the photo. Against all odds, Daniel had survived. He had made it to California, started over, and continued doing what he loved most, creating art. The discovery filled Ethan with a mix of emotions: relief, pride, and a profound sense of connection to the man he had never met but now felt he knew intimately. But the article also raised new questions. Why hadn't Daniel reached out to Margaret's mother? Had he tried and failed? Or had fear and guilt kept him silent? Ethan realized he might never know the full truth, but that didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that Daniel had persevered, even in the face of unimaginable loss. Armed with this newfound knowledge, Ethan returned to his hometown, ready to confront the legacy of bitterness and secrecy that had shaped his family. Standing once again at his mother's grave, he placed a fresh bouquet of white roses beside the headstone. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and distant rain. "Mom," he whispered, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. "I found him. I found Daniel. He didn't abandon you or me. He fought to keep living, to keep creating beauty even when life tried to break him. And now, I understand why you kept his story hidden. You weren't protecting me from the truth, you were teaching me how to carry it." For a moment, the wind seemed to pause, wrapping around him like an embrace. He closed his eyes, feeling the presence of his mother, and perhaps in some small way Daniel too. When Ethan walked away from the cemetery that day, he did so with a lighter heart. The secrets of the past no longer weighed him down. Instead, they became threads woven into the tapestry of his identity. He vowed to honor them, not by clinging to anger or regret, but by embracing love, resilience, and forgiveness. As he drove home, the sun broke through the clouds, casting golden light across the landscape. For the first time in years, Ethan felt whole. He wasn't just the son of Margaret Carter or the grandson of Daniel Harper. He was Ethan, a man shaped by the stories of those who came before him, yet free to write his own chapter.